Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at the Lauria, the steel sap battleship, Italian tier 10 battleship here that has 457 mil guns with sap, which means you're just overmatching cruisers with sap shells, which means a lot of damage that is pretty much unavoidable. Not the best thing for cruisers in this game. But if you're looking to pick up the Lauria, you should know that the Dispersion can get a little bit wonky at times. It's still a very strong battleship, don't get me wrong. 457 mil guns, great concealment, amazing speed, surprisingly okay armor, and of course, those amazing sap shells. We also get some okay AP. We're going to do some decent damage here into this Yamato. If you do get a broadside, you do want to be swapping over to that armor piercing. Generally, my rule surrounding sap is if I can Citadel someone pretty reliably, I'm going to swap over to the armor piercing. But because sap tends to have a higher alpha damage than AP would, a pen from sap is worth more than a pen from armor piercing. That doesn't quite take into account saturation and all that, but in a situation like this where we have a broadside battleship with a large citadel, of course it's going to be better to swap over to the armor piercing. Against a rune here where I'm not too sure if I actually can Citadel him at these angles. Also, we're in a thunderstorm. We are not always going to be trusting our Dispersion to hit those Citadels. We may as well just stick to the sap and then just guarantee that really good alpha damage from full pens. There we can see a little bit of rough Dispersion at times, and that's really the downside in my opinion on Lauria. I wasn't really a huge fan of this thing when I initially looked at it just because of its inconsistent main guns when it came to Dispersion specifically. It needs to be inconsistent though. This ship is just flat out OP if it gets good Dispersion. If it's getting the right Dispersion, you are doing 20, 30k salvos pretty easily to people with this sap at ridiculous angles. So that's just not allowed, basically. You can't have a ship that does that, right? And Lauria can do that some of the time, but I do find it has a little more inconsistent Dispersion than I would like. You'll see that off and on in the video here. We'll go back and forth between absolutely nuking people, and then every once in a while I'll be like, really? That's all the damage we did? Or we didn't even hit any shells, for example. But I think Lauria is a pretty decent pickup for steel. I think it's going to be a pretty solid battleship in random battles. It can also be used in clan battles, ranked, that kind of thing, just to go after some of those radar cruisers. It's very, very difficult for a radar cruiser to survive on an island with a Lauria shooting at it. Even bow in, Lauria will be just getting very consistent big damage salvos into it. Not every salvo, but eventually that radar cruiser is going to die, even if it's a Stalingrad or a Moskva or something like that. Sap is just that good at not caring about angles. It's kind of crazy. Pushing up here into an Ohio in this game, and 20k! Yeah. It's pretty disgusting what sap is capable of. It's a very hard ammo type to balance. It's kind of why overall I would prefer to not see sap in this game. I kind of talked about that initially with the Italian cruisers, and we saw what happened as soon as we got the normal Italian battleships in the line, is they just nerfed the Dispersion massively so that it wasn't consistent. Venezia, pretty consistent, of course. That's why it's so good. I think with Lauria, we're getting the first iteration of a more consistent battleship. Colombo, it's rough. let's just be kind and say it's rough for now. Lauria is much more consistent than the Colombo, of course, and the sap damage certainly shows for it. This is a ship where I feel like sometimes I get really high damage games, and yet I'm still a little bit annoyed at the Dispersion, and yet I'm still doing great damage. This game, for example, up over 215,000 damage. And if you're just going to spam sap at things from longer ranges, you're still going to do okay. But I think using this ship as a mid-range ship that can also push flanks very well, because it is so fast, can be very, very strong. Here we swapped over to the armor piercing. Probably didn't expect that, honestly, from the Ohio. And we do manage to get a Citadel into him. That's something you can be doing with Expert Loader. Shooting sap, getting them a little bit used to you shooting sap, and they open up their angles a little bit more. And then you just swap over to the armor piercing and get a Citadel. That kind of thing is very, very powerful. Pretty solid first game, and I have another one here to show you. And this salvo right here, this is the problem right here, because this is OP. If this happens every salvo at these ranges, this ship is just disgustingly overpowered. Look at that. 27,000 damage into a Vermont right away. If we get that every time, and we don't, fortunately, but if we can get that every time, this ship is insane. And that's maybe why I'm just not as hyped about this ship as some other people are, and that's okay. I just don't find the consistency to be quite there. But that said, it is still very, very good. You can see us just getting a very standard initial kiting position. This is pretty boring playstyle, but Lauria with only 79,000 HP isn't going to be the pushing ship. It's not going to be the initial push ship. You need to guarantee that flank is going to work, or else you will be burnt down relatively quickly. The armor I have mentioned is pretty decent, but you do have an exposed citadel, so you do have to be very careful of that if you are broadside. Fortunately, you don't have to be broadside if you don't want to, just because the concealment is so good. Later on in this game, you're actually going to see that, where we get a little stuck bow in, but oftentimes we are able to go dark and then just turn out very nicely. Into this Iowa here, notice I am just sticking with the sap, and our damage is okay onto this guy. I always feel like I should be trying to use the armor piercing more, and yet it seems like I really want to just stick with the sap because it is a little more consistent when it hits the target. Like I said, if we are getting citadels, the AP is worth going for, but even here, where this Iowa is broadside at these longer ranges, I just don't trust the dispersion quite enough to actually go for those armor piercing shots. So I'll just stick with the sap instead. And after playing Bungo a little more this patch, I gotta say, this dispersion does feel a lot less consistent, just because Bungo has such ridiculously consistent dispersion with that spotter plane up. I've been really, really enjoying that ship. You can expect some more videos on that one to come pretty soon here. But we had to take a look at Lauria, since it is available this patch. And I've been getting some questions on it. For example, should you go for Lauria or Incomparable? Incomparable is one that I looked at a long time ago, and it did not go... Look at that dispersion, by the way. It didn't go very well with Incomparable. 6 guns, and I found it to be rather inconsistent, at least when I played it. Might have to take a look at it again, but I think it's pretty safe to say Lauria, for me, would be a better pick over Incomparable. Incomparable might be the last ship I would pick, if at all possible. Lauria or Mecklenburg, it really depends on what you're after. They play a similar playstyle. Mecklenburg just getting a ton of smaller caliber guns to get the damage. Yeah, there you go. 8k into the Yamato there. Yami should be like a really juicy target for us with that upper belt being so easy to farm. But I would probably take Lauria over Mecklenburg even. Not a huge fan of playing Mecklenburg personally. And Lauria can get some nice flanks, and it can get some good slaps in with the sap and the armor piercing. Where Mecklenburg, it can do it too, but the smaller guns don't really allow me to do it against battleships all that easily. Where Lauria has the big enough guns that it can actually punish battleships, like the Yamato we saw early on. Although Mecklenburg might do it at that range as well, getting those citadels. Notice here, getting stuck bow in a little bit, and yet we are still able to go dark and turn out. Not the best game so far, at least on this one, but what we really need to take note of is what this ship is going to do to cruisers, and especially to just all ships close up. When you're closer ranges and you can guarantee that damage in, that's when this thing really shines. Even though it is dangerous with a battleship with rather low HP and overmatchable armor, it's pretty disgusting when you get the right scenarios for Lauria. Devastation, of course, going to be an excellent target for us to go after. Tons of soft armor for this sap to just eat through. So we're going to go after him really quick. And we do want to take a look at some of these cruisers as well. For now, though, Devastation, 11k from 3 hits. It's decent. It's not doing that 20 to 30k like you might see in some of those best salvos, like that Vermont salvo at the beginning of this game. That's not the usual salvo. I think that's really important. If you're going into this ship expecting 20 to 30,000 damage every salvo, no matter the angle, I don't think you're going to get that. Sometimes it's going to feel like that is what's happening to you when you're fighting this ship. I certainly feel that myself. When I initially looked at this ship, I believe I said, this is going to be a very frustrating ship to play against, and a frustrating ship to play, just because the consistency that you're feeling as you're fighting it is, wow, it's such an oppressive sap monster that's always doing massive damage no matter the angle I take. That isn't exactly the experience that the guy playing it is getting all the time. So it's an odd one. It's a very odd ship in that regard. As you can see there, another 18k into Devastation. it does have those hits. We're forcing this guy back even. He's used his super heal, I believe, so that's why he's backing off on us here. And he doesn't have the ability to use all of his guns, right? So that does allow us to hopefully get some good hits in. There we only hit 2 shells. One of them even bounced. Yes, sap can bounce. It's not very likely, but it can actually bounce if the angle is extreme enough. Brindisi. Look at this dispersion. Look at that dispersion, right? But that 11,000 damage took 5 full pens there. There is some saturation that you got to worry about with the sap. But that is overmatching straight through a Brindisi there, no problem. Same with this Salem. Really doesn't matter the angle he takes against me. If I'm going to hit him in the hull, we're going to do some massive damage. And here we go. Decent dispersion. Yep. That's a lot of damage. Although we don't kill him, interestingly enough. Part of me thinks that if I had... I mean, Bungo's an extreme example, but even a Montana, I probably would have killed him there at that angle. If he's shooting his rear gun at us, we would be getting Citadels on him, I think. The main does finish him off there, so we don't actually get the damage out of him. But even though the damage is really, really strong there into those 2 cruisers, I think at those ranges, a lot of other battleships would have done some nice things with the armor piercing. Can't say the same about that salvo into the devastation, though. That was nasty. But he does clap us for another 20k as well. So we do need to take a look at the armor just to kind of explain what happened there. I was very confused in-game, like, how did he 20k me? I don't think he Citadel'd me, and he didn't. There wasn't that big explosion particle effect of a Citadel. But another over 200k game, very strong stuff, and yet I'm just kind of mediocre feeling on the Lauria for me personally. As you can probably tell, I'm a little conflicted on what to say about Lauria. I don't think it's a slam dunk OP ship that you're always going to have good games in. And yet, when Dispersion lines up, the sap on this ship is disgusting. It is so difficult to deal with. But we should take a look at the armor real quick. And notice that there's this 50 mil upper shelf here that kind of also gets a flat cutoff here. So since I was at an angle like this, and that devastation aimed up into our superstructure, we have this kind of shot trap here where we can kind of just take full pens very easily from armor piercing, even angled properly, right? This is just going to be quite flat for us. It's no Yamato cheek where there's going to be Citadels there, but it functions in a similar way where it's not angled properly, even though the rest of our boat is. At closer ranges, you're going to eat damage there more. At longer ranges, probably not so much. 32 mil pretty much everywhere, although this central deck is pretty decently armored. But this is a very long ship, so a lot of shells will land here. And you do have some decent deck armor back here as well. But there's enough 32 mil that you're going to eat a lot of HE damage. You're going to eat some Overmatch as well as we play some of these higher tier ships. And that Citadel, well, not the best. Not the best. It's kind of funny, even like around these smokestacks, maybe this is where the engines would be. Yeah, it is large. It is a large Citadel. And I still don't think that devastation Citadel'd me there. But we did take 20k damage of just full pens. But if you are broadside, yeah, you're going to eat some serious pain because this is just all Citadel. Pretty waterline here, though, around the turrets. You do, if you want to Citadel this thing, you really do have to hit it midship. But at closer ranges, that can definitely be possible. But yeah, the 457s here, just very strong. I've just found the dispersion to be okay, just frustratingly almost good, like almost really good. You get those salvos every once in a while, those 27Ks into a Vermont, the 23K into the devastation there. Very, very, very powerful, and yet there are times where it just misses. It just decides to miss, and that can be quite annoying. But I think necessary considering the sap. Concealment 12.3, 36.8 knots. Ridiculous how fast this thing is. So flanking, not an issue. Of course, we do want to take things like brisk, buffing that, considering we have the concealment to use it, and the speed is just really, really nice after that. I am running some weird builds right now, to be totally honest with you. With this update, I've been trying to take Furious more. I've been trying not using fire prevention. My initial impressions of not using fire prevention is that there's not been many situations where I've died in a battleship where I think fire prevention would have saved me. If I'm dying to the dots and the fires and that, I'm usually dying because I mispositioned, not because I lacked fire prevention. Don't take that to mean I think fire prevention is bad or something you shouldn't be taking. It can definitely save you, but I think for me, I'm finding that I'm okay. I can have some really, really good matches and not die, even if I'm not taking fire prevention. Builds are weird though right now. Just going for a standard build, going adrenaline rush, extra heal, concealment, fire prevention, basics of survivability, and then maybe taking brisk. Gunfeeder is pretty nice to have, to be fair. Something like that. Something a little more basic. The standard quote-unquote build is probably a little bit better, but I am experimenting. So keep that in mind with when you see some of these builds this update. We're definitely experimenting. The upgrades are very, very normal on this ship. Nothing really extra to see there. In fact, let me just show you how much I'm experimenting. Just a little sneak peek at Bungo right now. Yeah, heavy AP, Furious, no fire prevention. Yeah, we're living on the edge a little bit. But we'll take a look at Bungo some other time. For now, Lauria seems to be a decent steel battleship to potentially a very good one, and an even OP one. Just for me personally, not a huge fan of the inconsistency on the main guns, even though that inconsistency is necessary because sap shells are so strong. So let me know what you think in the comments down below about the Lauria now that it is out for steel. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.